Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising from the beautiful city of Amsterdam, where I've been for the last several days dealing with various business matters pertaining to the future of Ubiquity University. Welcome to our broadcast, wherever you are around the world. Today is March 17th. This is the day when Irish people and people of goodwill around the world celebrate St. Patrick's Day. And there is a lot of Irish whiskey that flows, and good eating and feasting and joviality in celebration of the patron saint of Ireland. He lived between 385 and 461 in Ireland. Those of you who don't remember, he was actually English. And when he was 16 years old, he was abducted by some pirates and taken over to Ireland, where he was held as a slave for about, I think it was, if I recall, 6 or 7 years. Then he escaped, went back to Britain, entered the church. He was so traumatized, he turned his fortunes to God. Became a priest, and then went back to Ireland and spent the rest of his life evangelizing the Irish people, the Celts. Became a bishop in the newly founded Catholic church there, and then died at a very ripe old age, celebrated throughout Ireland and the English-speaking world as a man of great integrity, extraordinary commitment, was a wonderful orator, and began an impulse in Ireland that Thomas Cahill, if you know his book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, really at the crucial moment when, in the lifetime of St. Patrick, the Roman Empire that had stood for over 1,000 years was collapsing. And it was the Irish, the monasteries, that preserved much of the literature that was then brought back by the Irish 400 years later into Europe. And that story is told by Thomas Cahill in his book, How the Irish Saved Civilization. And then it was in the 17th century that people began to honor the death day of St. Patrick. And that's what we celebrate around the world today. So I just want to welcome everyone to Humanity Rising today in the spirit of the Irish. We're going to talk to an Irishman in a minute on this day. But before we do, let us pause, as we always do, and just take a moment in all the hustle and bustle and turbulence of our world to quiet ourselves, close your eyes, and just attune yourself with your heart for the next minute or so, in the spirit of gratitude and thanksgiving. Let us just be grateful for being alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey.
Jack
Thank you, everyone. Now it's my pleasure to introduce all of you to a very good and very old friend of mine, one of the first Irishmen I ever met, actually, Jack Healey. I've known Jack since the 1980s, some 40 years, and he's been an inspiration for the entire time because Jack has been one of the most ardent and stalwart campaigners for human rights that led him, as part of his very impressive career, to be the executive director of Amnesty International in the United States for over 12 years. He was instrumental in the rise of Aung San Soo Chi in Myanmar and has been involved in many of the major human rights cases that we'll talk about over this next hour, including Leonard Pelletier, he's now part of the effort to set free from prison. So Jack, welcome to Humanity Rising. And why don't we start, Jack, just tell us about your upbringing, maybe since this is St. Patrick's Day, tell us a little bit about your Irish pedigree and how you came to your passion around human rights.
I'm the last of 11 children. My father was killed when I was 2, and we dropped into poverty immediately. So my mom raised us by herself. We were very Catholic, and it was part of our faith to get through all of that, because we could have all ended up in orphanages if FDR hadn't passed the Social Security, where the last 4 children got checks every month, which gave my mother food. So it's kept us out of the orphanage. But I guess when people ask me about how there's 2 things that happened to me about justice and passion. My mother, her brothers, her uncles, her grandparents were all miners in Eastern Scranton. We lived in an $8 house, a company house, and all of us of my generation and before it were from the west of Ireland, and we spoke Gaelic, which meant we were the lowest in the unions, which we had to fight for that. And then one of the corporations in New York, the coal corporations, along with the Pinkertons, ran a conspiracy against us Irish in the coal mines, mainly against the left of the union, which are the Gaelic speakers. And they ended up with this conspiracy. The US government believed it, the Catholic Church believed it, the press believed it, New York Times believed it. And they hung 24 of them in Pennsylvania, and no Irishman was allowed to be on the jury. So that's the generation that came before my mom, and she passed that on to me. And then in midlife, after serving in Africa as a Peace Corps director for 5 years, I met Pharaoh Garahi from Iran, and she became my partner. And she was a person very smart, very skilled, and believed in human rights as my mother did. So the 2 women really formed me into my work and my career, and I'm grateful to that. There's one story that Molly Maguire in Ireland would wake her children every morning and say, "Hurry up, my darling sons and daughters, we got to overturn a dictator today." And it sort of was, I think, the attitude of a lot of us, mainly because of English oppression in Ireland, that kind of atmosphere around us as children, even for the American Irish. We were ready to we were ready to fight British oppression or get the attitude of that fighting spirit. I think that's where it came from.
Wow, so you come from a real lineage of Irish that were oppressed simply because they were Irish, and then impoverished given the death of your father. So you've, in many ways, Jack, you kind of lived the Irish experience existentially in a very profound way. Do you think that shaped your character?
I think in 1923, after my mom and dad decided to go to Pittsburgh for steel, get out of the dirty, filthy, corrupt mines, they moved to Pittsburgh and in a place called Carnegie, which is named after Andrew Carnegie. And there was a certain part of that town that was very Irish. And the KKK in 1922 or 23 marched on our part of town, trying to burn a cross in front of our church, St. Patrick's, as usually called St. Patrick's. And the Irish met them at the bridge, it's called the Bridgeville Bridge, and destroyed the KKK and derobed them all. And one of their leaders, one of the KKK leaders, was killed in that, and it broke the back of the KKK in Pennsylvania. But we always had this sort of, as immigrants, we were getting our ass kicked pretty regularly. And so a lot of the Irish decided to either become a priest, a policeman, or a lawyer. And that's how we broke out of in America. Those were the avenues we hunted for to get out of that oppression, to fight back legitimately.
And then when you entered into the human rights domain, tell us about, the early part of your career.
I became a Franciscan priest, and after 2 years as a priest, it just didn't fit me. It was a suit. It was a good suit, but the suit didn't fit me, so I left. And I became director of Freedom from Hunger Foundation, working with young people across the United States. From 1969 to 74, I think we raised $15 million for world hunger. And in that process, which would be about the equivalent now of about 45 million, we got to know, and the young people that I worked with, we were very progressive. We wanted to fund the anti-apartheid movement. We wanted to fund the American Indians. We wanted to fund, Black empowerment. We were sort of ahead of our time, easily ahead of our time. We weren't trying to be ahead of our time, but it was the young people I was working with, and they chose where the money would go in their local community. We had over, I don't know, maybe 450 walks across the United States. When we mean walk, we mean 28 miles. So we did very well. And we got to know the different movements. And I was very happy to move from the priesthood into this climate of young people. What are we going to fund? What are we going to do with our money? And let's be progressive about that. So I was very lucky to get that. After that, I joined Dick Gregory. Dick wanted me to work for him. I met him at one of his runs from Chicago to Washington. And he was a very popular Black comedian at the time. Yes. And he and I got along very well. So we decided to work together. I did work with him for about 3 years, which was an immense fun, a lot of good. We tried to open up the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King, Bobby, and John. And we did get it funded, but we won the battle, not the war, because they gave it over to inspectors that were not very good, or, investigators weren't really committed to finding the answer to that. Then at that time, at the end of that time with Dick, I applied. I was asked to become a bureaucrat in the new democratic machine of President Carter. And I said, no, I don't want to be a bureaucrat, but I do want to go to Lesotho. Lesotho is a country surrounded by South Africa completely. And I thought I'd get my layman's PhD in anti-apartheid by taking that job. I wanted to be a good Peace Corps director, but I also wanted to go down and see what I could do to help the ANC, the African National Party, to see how I could help. And that's sort of the trajectory of my career.
Wow. You're talking about Dick Gregory. I met him in his later years, and it'd be worth, just before we dive into your career, to say a little bit more about Dick Gregory, because he ran across the United States, if I recall correctly. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, Jim, what happened on that, I was in a plane with Dan Rather, and I said to him, why don't you help Dick Gregory, to him? And I was sitting next to him. And he said, we're getting leery and weary of Dick Gregory, he says to me. So I thought to myself, this is important. I better figure something out to help Dick. So Dick had always been a runner. And I'd been meeting with him, with the great Charles Mingus. I got to meet Richard Pryor. I got to meet everybody. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. People loved him. But I kept saying to Dick, we should run. And what I was really hoping was to quietly and not even tell him, I want to drag him back more into the center of the country, more into this a central issue that would keep his popularity where it should be, so he'd be credible. Not, and give him more middle America. So he and I decided at his place that he should run across the United States. I think your friend of yours, Danny, and I, and Billy Davis, we raised about $90,000 to start it. And Dick ran across the United States. And when we got to New Mexico, Dick called me and said, Jack, go get Muhammad Ali tonight. I said, Dick, he's fighting tonight. No, I want you to go over. So I go over to his hotel. Sure enough, I end up in front of him. And I said to him, Mr. Ali, I didn't know what to call him. I said, Mr. Ali, we need you in New Mexico. We're not getting publicity we need. And you got to remember, at this time, Ali was the top of his power. He was worldwide. That camera, after the fight, would go around the world. So he says, wait a minute. He says, you want me to pay for this plane myself, run in some damn desert, and just go out there and hang out in the desert with Dick Gregory? I said, yes, sir. He's okay, I'll do that. He fights the guy for 15 rounds. They put the mic on. It's the first thing he says, I'm joining Dick Gregory in World Hunger. It did exactly what I had asked him to do. Perfect. So that picked us up. Then when we got to around Columbus, Ohio, the Americans were bringing tall ships into New York for the celebration. One of the tall ships was the Escalada. That's Escalada.
This was 1976.
1976.
Yeah.
So, and they were bringing a torture ship in with those tall ships. So Dick and I decided we're not joining that damn thing. We're not going to join those tall ships because of that. Esperado is a torture ship. We'll do some other event. And it was caused by what was coming into the harbor, And so we set up a concert where Stevie Wonder would play. And then at the right moment, Dick and Ali and a number of the politicians of New York would all run into the stadium together. Now, the white world saw that as a black answer to the tall ships. It was never meant to be that. We just didn't want to be there with a torture ship. So they called us from the mayor's office in New York City and shut us down. So we had a meeting with all the politicians and all that to confront it. We lost. The police would not allow us to do a concert across town because they perceived it as a black concert instead of white, and we that was not on our idea at all. But Dick did run from April 24th, I think, 50 miles a day, entered July 4th on the bicentennial. And that was the idea. We were going to steal the bicentennial from tall ships to fighting world hunger. And we did it pretty reasonably well, and it worked.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well done. It must have been quite an experience to go up to Muhammad Ali before his fight and make that kind of, by all accounts, sort of an outrageous request.
Totally outrageous.
It was only someone like Muhammad Ali who would respond with the honor and dignity that made him the great man that he was.
Yeah, and it was, I probably was the only white person in the room too. I mean, you don't know how things are going to go till you get there, right? And I'm sort of still new in Dick's chain of command, I'm still, So it was a brilliant, and he asked me to go to Germany with him. And actually in the fight, what happened is that I was put in the entourage and we went down to the fight like ringside. I was with his team. And in that first round, they hit each other so hard. I had to get
Now,
out of there.
which fight was this?
Jimmy
Who was he
Young.
fighting?
Jimmy Young.
Jimmy Young.
They hit each other so hard. If you're right around the ring, that sweat and blood comes off almost like a shower. I had to get out of there. It was so brutal of those hitting each other in kidneys and stuff. Oh my God, it was something. But he was lovely. He remained a friend. He came to Giant Stadium when I did the first Conspiracy Hope tour of the United States of Music for Amnesty. Muhammad Ali came and told me this is the first concert I've ever gone to. So I was pleased to see him again. And he still considered me a friend. He really was a lovely, lovely man. And Dick was great to work with. He was always, I'll tell you a great story about working with Dick Gregory. He sent me over to see Richard Pryor, and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to meet the great Richard Pryor, because Dick had integrated the stage for Blacks in America, and Pryor was the first superstar that followed on to that. So I get to Richard Pryor's house, and I told him, I said, sir, Dick sent me over here for $75, oh, he said, I'll give you 75. So I give you $75. I go back to Dick Gregory with $75. He said, I meant 75,000. I had to go back. Richard Pryor's at the door laughing like a hyena, saying, you're the dumbest white boy in the world. So he wrote a $75,000 check, and I took it back. But it was great to have that moment with Richard, the great Richard Pryor.
That's such a classic story of both chutzpah and naivete.
Yes.
So then you go off to Lesotho, and remembering everyone, this was in the 1970s.
77.
Mandela. Pardon?
77. I was the first appointment in Jimmy Carter's administration to the Peace Corps.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, everyone, this is the Mandela didn't come to power till the 1990s.
Yes,
so this was like almost 20 years. This is when apartheid was deep, and it seemed unassailable and was going to last forever.
Right.
Sort of like the Soviet Union before it collapsed. So, Jack, tell us what it was like to go to Lesotho in 1977 in the midst of sort of the darkest of the apartheid period. And what was that like? What did you do for those years?
I've chosen on purpose because in a certain sense, the Black movement at that time was saying whitey should get out of the movement. And while I didn't agree with that, I thought there is enough sense in that that I should change. So that's why I asked for Lesotho. And I got about 100 volunteers, maybe 120. And they did great jobs. I didn't have to worry about them. They do their job. But what happened not long after I got there, a bomb went off in a rondovel, which is the house of Basotho. And they're kind of thatch roofing and mud walls, and they're warm in winter and cool in the summer, so it works. What happened was the bomb went off. There was a priest, Episcopal priest, and Phyllis Naidu, who was probably the largest woman in this anti-apartheid movement, was the political officer of the African National Congress. There in that room, they were unpacking clothes for the refugees from Eastern Europe, and they cut the cord and the bomb went off. She got shrapnel up her backside and lost an eardrum. Father John lost his private parts, I think. Pretty wicked. My nurse for Peace Corps was living next door to them, and called me and said, "Get up here, Jack, this bomb went off. What do we do?" So we had a very large medical unit for our volunteers for all the kinds of things that volunteers can get in trouble with. Some Valium, bandages, all that stuff that you need. So we used all of that stuff for them. And then when they went into the hospital, which wasn't much good, we would deliver food because the food was terrible, wasn't nutritious. So we would take food in there. And we actually, within the time of that bomb, within a week after that, I was inside at the top of the African National Congress with Chris Hani, the military leader of the African National Congress, Phyllis Naidu, their leading political person for Mandela. I was actually inside the party because we were accepted, instead of being seen as CIA agents or, just Americans wasting their time or whatever. We were inside and they loved us, and that built for a 4.5-year relationship with them. Chris had to come and go. Of course, I don't know what he did. He was pretty super secret. He moved around. Phyllis stayed there the whole time and remained a very close friend of mine. We did a lot together, moved refugees around and stuff like that. So it was for me, it was like, they talk about being Paris. The artists talk about being Paris in the 30s. Well, this was my Paris in the 30s. I was exactly where I wanted to be in this world, doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. It was truly an exciting and formative time for me.
Mm. And then during that time, Jack, did you have interactions with the ANC in any way in South Africa? Did you travel to South Africa, or did you basically stay in Lesotho?
No, I traveled quite a bit into South Africa. I fired a Masutu who on my staff, and he sued me in court. So I told Kaleki Sello, who's the leading ANC guy there, get me a lawyer, because you got to have 2 lawyers for some reason in British courts. You got to have 2 barrister and a lawyer or something. Get me one of Nelson Mandela's lawyers to defend me, bring him up from Joburg. So he did. He brought Dennis Cooney, who was one of the lawyers for Winnie and Nelson Mandela. And I said to Dennis, and he became lifelong friends with me. He just passed away not too long ago. Great, great jurist. And through him, I actually got to know all the lawyers of Nelson Mandela. There are basically about 12 or 15 of them. And I met Bram Fischer's daughter. So I got in not only in top of the ANC in Lesotho, I was now inside the lawyers who defended the ANC in South Africa in a very short time. So a lot of them used to come to Lesotho and visit me, and I'd visit them in Lesotho as well. And of course, all of this disturbed the embassy, because they wanted me as a Peace Corps director be on their team. And they wanted me to provide information, which I wouldn't do. And I'd say, because there's a law that Peace Corps is not supposed to participate in intelligence work. So at a certain time, I would just announce to the ambassador, I'm leaving. And they used to get mad as hell because they knew I knew more than everybody else in the room. But I would not participate in that. I told them clearly, I'm against apartheid. You are with the United States, who supports apartheid. I'm not. I'm on the opposite team. And they never liked me ever after for doing that. But that was my position, and I held to it. They came after me to fire me probably about 5 or 10 times. And all the cables went back to, I think his name was Dick Moose. He was Assistant Secretary of State for Africa. He was a friend of Sandy Berger's, and Sandy was a close friend. He became one of the top people in the Clinton administration. He kept telling Dick Moose, Jack's going to bother those people. Just let them alone. And luckily, I got protected.
Good for you. And you served out your 5-year term, but decided not to go into a second term.
The terms are 2.5 at a time, and you're supposed to move after your first term. I begged the administration I think it was Dick Celeste from Ohio, who was governor of Ohio. I begged him, could I be the exception and stay in Lesotho? Because I needed what happened with our volunteers, about 15 to 20% were always minority. Minority in South Africa is different than a minority in the United States. Like Chinese people in South Africa were Black, Japanese people were white, and Mediterranean person in the sun could be deemed for in the morning is is white and then at night black. I mean, it's a very, very arbitrary law to protect whatever they felt like doing. So I changed the training program, and what I did was hire ANC people to train our people on how to travel in South Africa, because a black and white couple going down in South Africa, they'd put the woman in a hotel and put the black guy in a chicken coop. So we had to train them to get ready for that. And if they got into a hassle or a fight with the police, or, what can happen in those situations, I had to train them. So I hired them. And then I think the guy from South Carolina, I forget his name, Senator something, came after me and said I was hiring communists. And I said, yeah, I am hiring communists, because those are the only people who know how to train my people in South Africa. Because I said, Senator, what if my volunteers broke a leg, a terrible accident, like on a motorcycle, which a lot of them used? Do I put them in the black hospital or the white hospital? Oh, he says, we'll send a jet down from Frankfurt. I said, oh yeah, 12-hour flight down, 12-hour blackout flight. He'll be dead by the time he gets to Frankfurt. We have to have immediate, you have to have immediate being taken care of here. So they never knew how to answer that question, ever. So I kept pressing them that once you enter South Africa, you're for a system that we're against, but it doesn't take care of our minority volunteers equally as well as the white volunteers. And that has to be corrected. So that was another thorn in their side, but the Peace Corps backed me up. John Lewis was there. So he looked out for me. John was an old friend of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he was at the forefront of just about everything having to do with human rights for a very, very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. The best, truly a saint, and he was a Saint John. They used to call him Saint John. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So then you finished up in Lesotho, and then what was your next move?
I saw an ad. Reagan had hired people to get rid of people like me, and they were doing it. They were finding them. Because we were in Peace Corps, we were lower on the tree to go after. I answered a one ad. I didn't want to be in Southern Africa with the new Reagan. I think he called it constructive engagement, and I thought, no, it's ridiculous. I don't want to be here and represent that. So I started looking to get out, which was about after 4.5 years I was there. And I saw an ad on the back of the wall of Peace Corps volunteers, because they would put up ads for jobs when they were leaving. They'd see jobs they could apply for. And it was there that I applied. I thought, I don't know anybody. I probably won't hear from them. But I did hear from them. And I got a ticket to come back to be interviewed for the job at Amnesty International. That's how that happened. And so I interviewed, but I really didn't care whether I got the job. I was feeling so good to be back in America. I went to it. I was very upbeat, and all that. So I interviewed very, very edgy. Let's put it that way. They asked me who I was, and I said, I'm the son of Jesus Christ, John L. Lewis, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They almost all fell off the table.
That's some pedigree, my friend.
I figured, well, I'm a former Catholic priest. FDR saved my family with Social Security from us being pushed into orphanages. John L. Lewis was our mining leader. So I thought it perfectly described me.
By the way, before we get into your tenure at Amnesty, Cuff Ferguson was asking whether the senator that was saying you were hiring communists, would that by chance have been Senator Strom Thurmond?
It was Helms, now that I remember it.
Jesse Helms.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were two blood brothers.
They were brothers. Yeah. Volunteers would write home that, that I was sort of a Mao Zedong character. I mean, it took a while for the volunteers to get used to me, because I called for a voluntary boycott of South Africa. If you really didn't have a good reason to go, you shouldn't go. You shouldn't spend American money in South Africa. And threw the volunteers off, but it was a voluntary boycott. So I didn't try to enforce it, but I didn't want them there spending American money if I could stop it.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about your tenure at Amnesty, because that would have been now in the 80s during the Reagan administration. You're now at the helm of Amnesty International USA. What were the sort of the prime cases that you dealt with? Tell us those stories.
Basically, when I got there, we were a small, sleepy organization. Nobody really knew who we were. Most of the time, they thought we were either a group to avoid taxes, or avoid the draft, or Bertram Russell's group, or nobody knew who we were. We were less than $3 million, and it was a sleepy thing. And I thought, this is a very important organization, does great research. I can do something with this. But we had a group of people from New York that thought they owned the organization. And I'm thinking, no, I think the victims own this organization. They need you. And so there were battles of vision that had to be settled. So I went to music immediately. I flew out to see Bill Graham, my first trip. And he and I argued. We finally got to an agreement point that he would do the tour if I could get the talent. And I wanted to bond music to human rights. And I wanted to bond the young people in South Africa to our young people in the United States as one unit in the world. Because I saw that everybody in jail or being tortured or killed in the world are basically between 10 and 20. There's not many old people really go in. And if you're going to be tortured, you're younger, So I wanted to expose that and attack that and find in the United States a vibrant group of human rights supporters who would use their freedom for other people's lack of freedom. So that's what I did. I used music. We went from 3 million to 21 million. And to give you an example of how mine was different, they would do like a report on the Philippines. It would take 9 months to do that. Send it out, bring it back, write it up, blah, blah. And I'm saying that takes too damn long. There's a channel coming called CNN. It's going to be there before us. We got to be able to do this faster. So Marcos landed in San Francisco, and we convinced the mayor's office and Feinstein in person that she handed the Amnesty report directly to Marcos getting off the plane, and it actually happened. And so I wanted that.
Let's take a moment, Jack, to explain who Marcos was.
Marcos was the president of the Philippines.
Right.
And a very corrupt man who traveled with literally a plane load of gold. When he left the Philippines, a plane load of gold followed him, I think to Hawaii or something for his wife or something like that. Anyway, he had sent an advance team to the United States to get him ready. And the guy in charge of the advance team was a known torturer in the Philippines. So I went after him. That's what I was after, that guy, and bringing Marcos, and how do I head that off? So before that, they would just hand out literature at the press, at the embassy, or, do the normal average thing. I said, no, we got to get him coming off that plane, and that's what we did. And that sort of is an example of how my aggressiveness, we do it more directly than before. We get a little rough on this. We're not into child play here. We're into very serious business. So we handed it to him directly. The Mayor Feinstein did. And they changed the law, by the way, so the mayors are not allowed to do that anymore. But we did get it done.
What was the upshot?
I think what happened is, this is fundraisers talking, not me, but they say people give to the leader. They follow the leader. If they see someone who's doing some credible shit, they'll support that person. I think they start seeing what I was doing was credible in the public eye, and started supporting us. That's when the support started to come to us. Yeah, I would say so. And
It's worth mentioning, everyone, that Marcos's wife, Imelda, was famous for her shoes. She, I think, if I remember, Jack, she had over 6,000 pairs of shoes.
and they needed the plane for just shoes. Yeah.
That's just a little vignette about the magnitude of the corruption that was going on in the Philippines that Jack was challenging when this guy was coming on sort of a goodwill tour of the United States, because the Reagan administration had a close relationship with the Marcos regime.
Yeah.
But then beyond Marcos, then what was your next major campaign?
Well, there were a number of them that came along. Like I wanted to put up a billboard in Washington, D.C. I think it was Sri Lanka. I wanted to put up tea and torture. They exported tea. So I just wanted to put tea and torture up. And that threw a whole bunch of people off too, because they were used to this. The board was used to this sort of mamsy-pamsy way of doing things. Just getting the literature, pass the literature around, hope someone read it. If you got real lucky, you got it in the New York Times. I'm back there saying, no. We're getting aggressive. We're gonna. There's an urgency in protecting the world's people against these governments. We have to have more urgency in our work. And a lot of people didn't like it. It caused controversy, but I was hell bent on it. I started music in '84. Bill Graham and I had agreed that if I got the talent, he would do the show. I wanted to do a cross-country thing to explain Amnesty, because we had put up a camera outside the subways, and all day we shot asking people who's Amnesty International. Nobody knew who it was, and they would say it's a band, it's a group going to Canada, tax group. They didn't know what it was. So I knew we just had to somehow change that image and let Americans know what is human rights. In particular, with Amnesty, was political imprisonment, torture, fair trials, and death penalty. So I thought we got to do television. We got to do, and they had never done television before. So I wanted to do PSAs. I wanted to go to celebrities, start talking to them, because I had experienced that with Dick Gregory. I knew that celebrities could help if you used them well. So Bill and I decided to do a cross-country tour of the United States. In '84, U2 showed up in New York. They sent over $10,000 and 2 tickets. My French secretary, who's French woman, came in and said, "Jack, I know this band. Can I take my boyfriend to see this band?" I said, "Yeah, sure. I don't know who they are, but tell them thanks for the $10,000." So anyway, her boyfriend was slowed up by snow or something. I don't know what happened. She said, "Come on, Jack, go with me. I don't want to go alone." So I said, "Okay, I'll go alone." So we're the last 2 seats in Radio City Hall. I think it was Radio City Hall, maybe another one, I don't know. And on the stage was the leprechaun Bono, and they had such immense talent. It was quite obvious they were going to be huge. I mean, I'm no music critic, but you could see that this band had talent.
Sure.
But the thing that convinced me was on the Jumbotron behind the stage, it showed the picture of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce Indians up in the Northwest, who had fought the military across the United States, halfway across the United States. And I thought, how do these Irish boys know what our American band should be talking about? And they're not. And this Irish band is, this was shocking. I said, this is my band. I didn't know how to do backstage or find a manager. I didn't know any of that. So I went to Ireland. I saw on a trip to Finland, we had a meeting in Finland, and we had I saw I could drop into Dublin on the way to Finland, and I would go see U2. And this was '84. So I go there. but I always wanted to see Sean McBride. Sean McBride was an Irishman who was one of the founders of Amnesty International, had won his own Nobel. His father had been hung by the British, and his mother was the woman of Yeats's poetry. And at 19, he was tutored by seeing O'Casey, George Bernard Shaw, James Joyce, Yeats, and Ezra Pound at 12 years old. This is an incredible man. So I called him. He answered the phone. He said, "Jack, come on over." And I told him, "You're the founder of Amnesty. I want you to bless what I'm doing. You know, to work with young people and his music." He was totally for it. So I had one founder behind me, which gave me incredible, wow, great. So I left there so happy, having met him and all that Irish history, which I always wanted to learn because he knew everything. I went over to U2's office, manager said, "What do you want?" I said, "Need your band for anywhere in the world for 2 weeks." Bono walked over. I said, "Are you Irish?" And threw him off because, we Irish here are plastic Irish. They're the real Irish. It kind of
They're the real thing.
Yeah. So it shook him a little, exactly what I wanted. He said, "What would you like, Mr. Healey?" I said, "Well, I want your band anywhere in the world for 2 weeks." He said, "Okay." I was back in the cab in 8 minutes. Honest to God, 8 minutes. I was back in the cab. I get to the airport. I call Bill Graham, tell him I got you.
With Bono, man, with Bono.
So I called Bill Graham. Bill Graham said, "You son of a bitch, you bastard. You don't know what you did, dude." All that stuff. So I knew we had a winning hand. We were going to tour the United States, play 6 cities, be live on MTV for 11 hours, syndicate on Fox at the time. And we put one of the greatest shows of all time together in music history.
I remember.
Yeah, and it changed America. We went from an unknown organization to the charity of choice, literally in that tour. We cleared $3 million at the gate for Amnesty, which was already met 1 year of our budget we already had. And then we got, within about 6 weeks, 55 or 65,000 new members at $25 each. So we were flowing in money. It started coming. That's called the conspiracy of hope.
Mm-hmm. And Bill Graham, everyone, if you don't remember him, was the impresario of rock and roll, and anybody was managed by Bill Graham. He was the man.
That's right.
And so Jack was able to get Bono with Bill Graham. So he was, it's the creme de la creme, just so everybody holds the achievements of this Irishman that we're talking to today.
Yes, and Bill was like a hurricane to work with.
Sure.
You never knew where the wind was going or which east, west, north, south. You didn't know. You just had to hold on.
Yeah.
It was like,
well, just as an aside, just to give people a sense of Bill Graham, when Jim Hickman and I and others were putting together the first live satellite link up between a band in Moscow and a band in San Bernardino, California, it was so radically new that Bill Graham was involved in the California one. He didn't believe it was really happening. He thought it was a CIA plot. And so while the bands were playing and they were, to get in sync between Moscow and San Bernardino in those days, in the mid 1980s, was not so easy. And Bill Graham, thinking it was a CIA plot, was backstage pulling all the plugs from the sound system and so forth and so on, and just going into this complete delirium of conspiracy. And so that's a little story about Bill Graham. But I'm sure, Jack, you have other stories. But he was a world unto himself.
He wanted to fight me once. And I told him, "Bill, we can fight, but we're both over 50. We'll look silly on the ground."
So you did this. You did this big rock and roll tour. You put Amnesty on the map. You're bringing in resources. Now, what did you do with that? Because you were clearly on a roll at this point, and given Reagan and Iran-Contra and all kinds of other things, there's lots of human rights abuses going on. Where did you prioritize your efforts after that?
Well, take for instance, once I brought 3 million in to add to the 3 million we already had, right? And so the international movement would tax us around 40%. So the international movement, the first great thing to happen was the research department got better funded, which was very important. It kind of lifted us, but it also lifted them because of the taxation of the leaders were taxed more than the small ones. So we were the leader. So it gave our international movement in London, the International Secretariat, great more strength and ability to monitor the world. So that was really pleasing to me and to our movement. I think the board was sort of won over that we're on the right path, at least, we're doing right. And really what I was trying to move us away from is sort of the Gutenberg press, just printing nobody read, into the camera. That's what I was trying to do, because I did a PSA campaign for the Conspiracy of Hope. We had every movie star in Hollywood. I mean, they lined up. John Huston was there, Robin Williams. Robin Williams ran so well for Amnesty on television, his ads that he did of Robin Williams. The manager called me and said, "Jack, can you take that down? Robin doesn't look that way anymore. He had aged." And that's how successful those PSAs were. But I wanted to move us from that just printing, which is centralized information and absolutely necessary, but nobody was reading them much. I wanted to get more popular with our movement among young people. I was really looking to drive it into grade schools, high schools, and colleges. That's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to bring the young in Africa or South Africa to our young and bond them together. One would use their freedom for their unfreedom. That really was the driving effort, was to pull that off. So probably in the next year or two after the Conspiracy of Hope in '86, I probably gave, I don't know, 200-300 college speeches, probably. I don't know how many. Immense number. But when I finished that, I said to Bill, this was easy. I thought it'd be hard. It wasn't hard. Once you got the right people, touring, not because they do this music all the time, and their teams are ready for all that stuff. So I thought, well, we did, and I landed in Aix-en-Provence. My partner was studying law in Aix-en-Provence. So I went over there on a vacation, and she was studying. I'd take care of her 12-year-old boy while she was at law school. So I land, and it's a beautiful day in southern France. It's so beautiful there. And I get to the airport, and she, of course, congratulates me and everything like that. And then she said, because she was Iranian, and didn't like her government, the Shah government. She opposed that Shah government, and she wanted the treatment of women better in Iran. So she meets me at the airport. She's all happy about the success I had. And she said, well, now that you've spoken to the Americans about human rights, I now want you to talk to the world about human rights. Mm. And that put a new thing in my head, a new vision in my head. I started thinking about that, and went back to Bill Graham eventually, talked to him about that, and that's where the world tour came about. Within the construct of Amnesty, there were 4 issues: political imprisonment, torture, fair trials, and death penalty. But if you put those down on one sheet and then put the USSR at the time, and the next sheet, and the third world in a third sheet, and put those 4 issues across, the United States didn't end up with much criticism on those topics. So I thought, in some ways, this four things of Amnesty were really pro-West, ultimately, because they let the West off. It gave cancer to the USSR and to the third world, but it really just gave a cold to the Americans or to the West. I wanted to change that. And the way I changed it was I did a world tour not for Amnesty, but for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 40th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. That's why I did that. And that went awfully big. We traveled the world. We played on 5 continents. We had 2 DC-10s. We had 300 employees. The total budget was 26 million in 6 weeks. And
Wow.
it succeeded.
Wow.
It succeeded tremendously. No mistakes. And we traveled the world, and we talked about
What were the big bands on that one?
Springsteen, Peter Gabriel, Youssou N'Dour, Sting, Tracy Chapman, and then each country we're in, we would pick the best band in that country. So there were 6 bands each night, and then we did the Declaration of Human Rights into animation. And the animation, in the break between one band and another, it always took some time. We ran that animation. I called it my 7th band, and we had it in the language of the people wherever we were playing. And that got as much applause as any band, because it was the animation of the Declaration of Human Rights in their language, and they appreciated it very much. That tour succeeded. I got an underwriting with Reebok Corporation for $10 million. I could lose up to $10 million because Bill and I wanted to play in soft currencies where much of the human rights abuses were occurring, like the USSR, Hungary, which was behind the Iron Curtain. We wouldn't have got anything out of there. So how do you pay for that, moving around? So I convinced Reebok that they would underwrite us up to $10 million loss. We only eventually took 3 million of their offered 10 million, returned 7 million to them. And the whole tour, our own tour raised 23 million of the 26 needed million. If we'd have doubled in Wembley, we wouldn't have needed even an underwriter. But we played in a lot of soft currencies, so we were very happy about that.
Fantastic. And then must have been around that time that you were starting to notice Aung San Suu Kyi, right?
Yeah, that's when she was grabbed. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us the story of your relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi.
Farrell, my partner and I, Farrell, this Persian girl I was telling you about, we decided after I left Amnesty, I wanted to devote myself to a clean movement. There were a lot of thugs in the ANC. I mean, Mandela was wonderful and many of his people, but there are also a lot of thugs in it. As it turned out later, they got into government from bad people. I wanted to clean. So we went over to take a close look at the refugees camps in Thailand or the Burmese. And she was under house arrest, so nobody could see her, but we figured we'll just go to Burma and see her anyway. To hell with it, just go. So we did that. We visited the refugee camps. It all turned out to be very clean, very honest, real, it was impressive. So we went over to Burma then, and we got a taxi cab driver. I think he was Indian or Bangladesh. I'm not sure. He told us, I said, I got to go see Aung San Suu Kyi. And I met with the State Department and this one and that one. This one. Nobody, you can't see her. She's under house arrest. No one can see her. Oh, okay. This guy says to us, this taxi cab driver says to us, I think she gives out rice once a week for a half hour to her people. So Farrell is brown, like the Burmese, sort of the same kind of brown skin. So I'll just put on a sarong and sit into that headquarters till she arrives. So that's what she did. And then one day, and I pretended I was an antique dealer, walk up and down this damn street about 400 times, looking at these damn antiques, which I never bought one in my life. And she comes out and said, Jack, she wants to see you. Okay. I go in and spend a half hour with her. And they throw us out that night, out of the country. But I came back and said, I met Aung San Suu Kyi, had some footage, and CNN said, you're creating news. We can't run that because you're making news. You're creating news. We only follow what news is real. You mean she's supposed to leave under house arrest and sneak out and give CNN a press conference? What the hell are you talking about? But we never did get that on there. But I got in there to see her, and we started to work. And I went to Shep Ferry early on, the artist. There's a woman by the name of Sister Carita, who's a Catholic nun in the 60s and did some beautiful work. And she had sent me our own, for what I had done at Freedom from Hunger, an actual original with 2 mistakes in it, of which she has, you could see them, how she made the mistakes and stuff. It was beautiful. It really, it improved how original it was. So I take this and I meet Shep and his wife Amanda at a store, pass this over with a cover on it. He said, "What is this?" I said, it's a piece of art by Carita. And he starts crying immediately. And I said, "Why are you crying?" He said, "Well, this is my teacher. This is my mentor. I always wanted something from Sister Carita." And I said, he said, "Why are you giving this to me?" I said, "Well, it's the only valuable piece I have. But you brought the young in America to vote, and you're here for the election of Obama. I'm so pleased you motivated the young with a piece of art. I love that. It thrills me that you're able to do that. So this is my contribution to you for doing this." He was overwhelmed. So he went back and created the iconic figure of Aung San Soo Chi forever. He just did the great art piece. It went all over the world. We shipped it everywhere. He gave me about 500 pamphlet or, pieces of art free. So I sent that to every artist and every office I could find, and everybody put it up. Of course, it's so beautiful. So that's how we built that movement. And then I did an album behind it. I did a movie behind it. Yeah.
Well, let's just track Aung San Suu Kyi for a moment, because you were there at her creation in some way, out of which she rose to become president and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. But then it seemed from popular media that her arc fell, and she ended up over the last number of years supporting genocide against the Rohingya, the Muslim minority there. How do you, Jack, as someone deeply immersed in these fields, how do you understand the trajectory of Aung San Suu Kyi's life? What happened?
My guess, Jim, I think it's a great question. Probably, I hope I have an answer. From what I saw of her, and from what the State Department told me, which I didn't believe at the time, they said she's too stiff. I did a big party in LA for her to meet the film industry at my friend Jimmy Miller's house. Beautiful night, beautiful. Everybody came. Everybody wanted to meet her. She's very stiff, very stiff. I don't know how to explain this, but she really didn't say anything to that crowd at all. And again, I'm wondering, well, so where's your message? Kind of, and my guess is she knows, this is now a post-interpretation, she knows that her Burman majority, which is about 80% of the country, they are high nationalistic people with a high degree of racism. And she knows she's one of them, and she represents the Burman majority and their nationalism. I think that's the answer to that. How she ran into trouble with the military, I don't know. How she got removed the second time, I don't know. But I think in the first instance, you could either see her as a hero going to be a big hero by taking on that nationalism, or was she part of it? Mm-hmm. Many of us believe she was part of it, and that she was just a nationalist much like our country now. You know, we divide between basically over race, right? And voting, right? Which is really a race issue. You either have pro-black, pro-white, you know, back and forth. I think she was one of the ones that sided with her people instead of being a progressive or whatever. That's my sense of it. It was a great disappointment. I don't think anybody ever asked her. I don't think we really realized the Brahmin majority really don't like any of the minorities. The Chin, you know, go up and down the Thai border with all the different tribes. She didn't like any of them. So when the Muslims start moving, the Rohingya start moving, they moved them out quickly. They were the first because they're the ones who they disliked the most. And they moved them out. And I think she supported that clearly, which means she's a very flawed human rights person. But on the other hand, that makes her a politician, doesn't it? I mean, really. And then she paid her own price then for it. Yeah. And
would you take away her Nobel Peace Prize if you had that prerogative? That was what was demanded by many human rights activists.
no, I'd hope it would set on fire and burn itself out.
Self-immolate.
Yes.
Well, listen, tell us just finally the story of Leonard Peltier, because everyone, because of Jack, we're going to have a whole session next month, the 22nd of April, on the story of Leonard Peltier, one of the great figures to come out of Wounded Knee and the American Indian movement and so forth and so on. But Jack, just tell us just the story of Leonard and your involvement with him, because it's such a poignant, heart-wrenching story.
Back in the 70s, with that freedom from hunger I told you about, we actually funded the American Indian movement. I got to know Bellecourt brothers and Russell Means, Dennis Banks. I actually knew them. Our kids in Wisconsin, Chicago, sort of the Midwest, were alert to Indian issues and sent a lot of money to the American Indian movement. So I had some sense of this early on. But Leonard was convicted of shooting 2 FBI agents, which he didn't do. He escaped. He went to Canada. The Americans said they had a witness against them, an eyewitness that saw him do what he did. So they could bring him back on that evidence, and that allowed for international law to be used. What really turned out is the woman who said that was lying. She had never even met Peltier, didn't even know what he looked like. And the Americans knew that, but they still brought Peltier back. So they broke international law. That was the first thing. And so they went into this long, eternal trial. Great lawyers for Peltier, Consular Ramsey Clark, Marty Garbus, great constitutional lawyers in the United States were there. And they just wanted to get someone in there from our point of view. They just wanted to convict because the FBI was so angry that they lost 2 young agents of theirs. And they also lost an American Indian that day as well, Joe Stutz. And Joe was the bodyguard of Dennis Banks, if I remember correctly. And they just laid that on Leonard. And they tried 2 people before that, and they were deemed innocent. And they left. And they tried Leonard. They convicted him 2 lifetime sentences. And he's been in jail ever since. He didn't do it. And to my mind, when I come into it more actively about 8 years ago, I try to convince our side that we ought to switch to mercy and compassion. That you serve long enough, guilty or innocent, let them out, let them go home. That should be our argument. The lawyers kept arguing their case, which is repeating the old crap from way back when. And that aggravates the FBI. FBI could show up with more people at a demonstration for Peltier against us than we can for Peltier. That's how angry they still are to this day. It aggravates them at no end. So we tried with Clinton. I got the Pope to send a wire to Obama. That didn't work. And so now I'm working on today at the White House, St. Patrick's Day. I'm trying to, the Choctaw people sent famine money to Ireland during the Great Famine. I would like the President Biden, because he's Catholic, to award the Choctaw people a special award today for getting the relationship between the United States and Ireland so well done. Thank the Choctaw people. And in that ceremony, I was hoping Leonard would be let free. Now that might or might not happen, I don't know, but that's the scenario. But I've done probably, I think 12 videos called I Will. You can look them up on, just type in I Will. Trying to show the different aspects of Leonard, his humanity. He's a teacher, he's a poet. You know, he's been in there 46 years. He's still a very sane man with a good sense of humor. For all the trouble he's had, he's a very fine person. The guards love him. His former prosecutor put him there, has turned and wants him out now. And I'm saying that along with the Pope Francis, who again went to Biden this time when he visited the Vatican, he actually talked to Biden about, you know, setting Leonard free. Just let him go. Let him go. It's 46 years is enough for anything. In maximum security, anybody who's been ever in one. He might be the longest serving prisoner in the United States now. And why? He should have been let go a long time ago. The lawyers kept using it's in the Constitution. They kept saying, you know, the clemency is in the Constitution. Well, what they really mean and don't know what they're doing, it's almost a trap, because that means you have to show remorse. Leonard would never show remorse because he didn't do it. So he doesn't have that avenue, but our lawyers keep arguing that clemency issue, which it ain't gonna ever work. All we can do is apply for compassionate release. So I've recruited the Catholic Church, who has been very, very strong behind it. Archbishop Winsky of Miami, Cardinal O'Malley in Boston is a former classmate of mine, Pope Francis. They've all come in behind Leonard. So we're trying to get him out, and I work on it day and night. I try to do another video every once in a while to keep it going. We have half the music world with us. We're strong and we're moving, but you know, it's up to Garland to tell the president you can let him out. I don't know whether that's going to happen.
Yeah, Garland doesn't seem to be a very dynamic individual. It doesn't seem likely under current circumstances. Now, as just two other final questions, Jack. The first is just your comment on the current political situation in the United States with, you know, suppression of women like we're seeing in Texas, and these very stringent anti-abortion laws, the suppression of the vote and the sabotage of the electoral process to exclude people of color and young people. How do you personally evaluate what's going on in the country that you love so dearly?
I think back in 68, Jim, 1968, there were splits that were made in the country that I call the eternal splits. The war people broke away from the peace people. Long hairs broke away from the short hair people.
Yeah.
Catholic Church split over the pill. Black and white split over the killing of Dr. King and a few other blacks that were killed, like Malcolm X. And there's three or four more that'll come to my mind. Red and blue states were started then as well. I think in those splits are eternal in our system now. And if we don't solve them, we're going to go into a very, very, very bad period, in which we may be in already. What we need is a leader to come along who can bridge those eternal splits. And what we do since 68 is keep electing for one side or the other. One side or the other. And that doesn't work. And that's why we're in the spot we're in. I think if we don't get the voting, the Black community will not take it anymore. They're tired of being told this about this business of voting. I mean, they're just sick of it. You should be able to just register like your driver's license or Social Security. You should just have it. They know it. They're not going to take it again. They could split from the Democratic Party if it doesn't happen too, I think. So I think our trouble's in front of us if we don't deal with it, and it worries me deeply, deeply. We could go into a very divided country. I give you an example. I went to school with a lot of kids. When I was in public school, I stay friends with those pals. They're all Trumpies. They're all of them I went to school with. And it's usually race. It usually comes down to race, I think. So I'm mildly optimistic, but very mildly optimistic that we can correct this. But otherwise, I think we're just headed for trouble.
Mm, mm, mm. And then finally, Jack, I know that one of your lifelong passions, which has been a through line, an Ariadne's thread for your career, is your passion around youth, human rights and youth. So just speak to that as we bring this dialogue to a close. Why you're so passionate about it? What are you doing now? Just tell us about human rights and youth.
I think it applies to my own youth. I think it. I think growing up poor, you need standards. You need to know where the goalposts are. And in school, they try to convince me I was stupid because I'm very dyslexic. And I remember one time in English class, teacher was making fun of me or something, like whatever. So I wrote, without telling them, I wrote a story about how a meal at Christmas time is really a circus, and the carrots are the strong men and the clowns are the different food. And I described that. And so she reads this and she calls me on and said, Mr. Healey, you get an A+ for this. Would you come up and read it to class? I said, no, lady, you read it because you don't want to think I'm stupid. I want you to read it to prove that I'm smart. And I think in a sense, I've been in, that battle of needing to create my own world as a dyslexic person. You create a secondary world. And I think that's been my answer to it. I think I want the goalpost to be the same for everybody because I saw the goalpost move regularly in my life as a young kid. I remember one time in high school, all these jocks, they wore this property of Dormont High School on them. They had their jerseys and they wore them to school. So I was the manager of the basketball team. So I took a worn out old gym, shorts and dyed them purple and wore them the next day in class. And they said I stole these. And I'm saying, in this room, there's 20 people with this property. There's no irony understood. There's irony was not understood in that high school at all. So they accused me of stealing this pair of gym shorts where everybody else was worried what they stole. So I saw that the goalposts were moved all the time, Jim. And I've always wanted for my mom growing up to know what the rules were, and we'll live by them, but we can achieve in the rules. And if you move the target all the time, we can't win. And that's been my inner drive and inner consternation of, I just want a fair playing field. So when they gave me an opportunity at Amnesty to show what I could do it. I don't know anything about business. I never had a job before. I never, even take the world tour. We had, luckily we had Bruce Springsteen, who was great. But I had to set up, with Reebok, I sold $10 million worth of seats even before the tour started. And so I had my own little genius at work. And I always felt that you just give me a fair playing field and I'm okay. I'll do fine. Yeah.
Well, that's at the heart of human rights, is this notion that we all should be on the same playing field, playing by the same rules. And if society can ensure that, all of us prosper in whatever ways our personal proclivities direct.
Tell you a funny story about it, because everybody loves John Lewis, right? So John would call me. He lived near me, about 3 blocks away. And he said, let's go shopping together, meaning, picking up food and stuff. I said, no, John, I don't want to go with you. He said, why don't you go with me? I said, well, because everybody loves you. You talk to everybody nice. I don't like everybody. You love I'll never get done shopping with you. So that I just wanted to close with a nice remark about it. Remember John and Dick Gregory, so because they were so formative in my life, No.
Jack Healey, everyone, one of the great human rights activists of our time, who, as you have just heard, has brought, I would say, Jack, an esprit de corps to human rights that put Amnesty International on the map, that mobilized the entertainment movie world around the human rights issue, and really transformed human rights into a global phenomenon that's had an impact on people everywhere. So Jack, on the day when we celebrate the Irish, I want to just acknowledge a great Irishman, and look forward to being in touch with you. We'll be talking with one of his colleagues, Sharon, and another colleague about Leonard Pelletier about a month from now. But Jack, thank you so much for just being who you are. You've been an inspiration to me for many years.
Well, thank you, Jim. I love you. Love you, Jim.
Love you too, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. Have a whiskey. Have a good whiskey on both of us.
Yeah, we walk up 5th and roll down 3rd. Love you.
Okay, everyone, that does it for us. You're welcome to the after session chat group. Jack, you would be more than welcome if you want to join. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also received it in the email from Matt Robertson. But that's it for us today, everyone. Thanks so much. We'll see you tomorrow for our final session this week. Bye for now.